Business and Local Government Data Research Centre, bringing data to life. Exploring data, enhancing knowledge, empowering society.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So we'll make a start because we've got lots to get through this morning. It's going to be a really exciting one, which is part of our bounce back from COVID-19 series of webinars. Today, we're talking about how to conduct a data audit. We've got Dr. Kakia Chatsiou with us again. She's our Senior Research Officer. But before we make a formal start, I'm just going to run through a little bit of information so that you know what to expect from today's webinar. Today is brought to you by the Business and Local Government Data Research Centre, and we're proud to support organisations across the UK, in fact worldwide. During today's webinar, you can increase the size of the screen so you can see the slides more clearly by clicking in the top right-hand corner of your video. You can ask questions in the Q&A. We'll have a gap at the end for the Q&A, which you can find in the bottom bar of the webinar. And then you can also engage with us during the chat and adjust your audio settings, all within the bottom panel of your screen that you can find on Zoom. So I'm going to spend just a couple of moments talking to you now about us as an organisation, and then I'll be handing it over to Kakia for the start of how to conduct your data audit. We're a team of leading experts that offer data-driven solutions to some of the world's greatest challenges that we face today. Our core mission is to combine fundamental research with applied, the impact that influences policy and informs practice. We've got three main priority areas, which you can see on the screen now. These are methodologies and techniques for data science and artificial intelligence, supporting local economic growth and vulnerable people. Now, through these three priority areas, we support the research community, the public sector, businesses and charities as well. Since we formed in 2014, we've worked with a range of organisations, both small and large, from charities to councils to the NHS and many more organisations. And we would love to collaborate with you as well. So how can you collaborate with us? We provide grant-funded opportunities which take the form of projects, training, webinars, workshops, challenge labs and events, as well as a support service too. You can find out more about our work and join in the conversation online at BLG Data Research, where you'll find us on Twitter, regularly tweeting. So if you want to join us throughout today's webinar too, I'll be looking out for your social media posts, so thank you. We like to think of ourselves as a place for ideas that matter. We, together with you, can explore data, enhance your knowledge and empower society. You are the first to hear about a new funding round that will be opening on Monday, the 31st of August 2020. You can find out more about how you can access grant-funded data analytics support for your projects on our website, BLG Data Research. So how can this new funding round help you? Through the Data Analytics Innovation Voucher, you can access renowned expertise in data analytics to bring your project to life. So if you're collecting data or faced with a challenge, and you feel that we can help, then please get in touch. Because as I said, the grant funding round is opening this coming Monday, and you can be the first to express your interest in receiving a Data Analytics Innovation Voucher. And more information about this will be given at the end of today's presentation, which will have details of how you can get in touch to express your interest. You can find out more about how to apply for grant-funded data analytics support during our next webinar, which is on the 9th of September at 10:30. Here you will have the opportunity to learn all about the support that we provide, how to apply for the grant-funded data analytics innovation vouchers, what we mean by a data research project, top tips for writing a winning application, key deadlines you need to keep to, some case studies terms and conditions, and much, much more. So if you'd like to register for our next webinar, this can be found on our website, blgdataresearch.org. And with that being said, I'm going to hand over to Kakia. I always enjoy Kakia's presentations. They're really engaging and informative. Now, Kakia's research focuses on areas of public administration evaluation, data science, and natural language processing. She pushes new boundaries of research, worked as an evaluation and data compliance consultant for local authorities as well as voluntary sector organizations. She leads training for policymakers on data analytics, including evaluation practices, text analysis, and much, much more. She has some fascinating work and so much to tell us today. So I'm really looking forward to today's session, which is the next step in how to bounce back from COVID-19 using data analytics. And today we'll be talking specifically about how to conduct a data audit. Over to you, Kakia. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. Let me share the screen. Welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are. Today we'll be sort of focusing more on an area of conducting a data strategy, which is conducting a data audit, which basically means what data you have, what you should be getting if you don't have it, and hopefully what I will show you through today is demystifying this process and sort of leaving you with a lot of questions and a kind of worksheet walking you through the process to make it more straightforward for you. So for those of you that have already attempted this, you probably have heard already all these different areas. So hopefully you might find one or two that you have not thought about or you have not actually implemented in detail. So hopefully that will be helpful to you. For those of you that have not attempted this before, hopefully today's session will give you a first idea of what it is that you need to be including. And by data audit today, we won't necessarily focus on what will make you GDPR compliant, although all the different steps that we are covering will in some way or another make you GDPR compliant, but it will be mostly around understanding the data you hold and where you can go with it next. So today I'll be covering things such as what is a data audit, why it is important, why I think it's important, how you could conduct it. So I'll be offering a step-by-step kind of walkthrough of how you could achieve that, and then giving you some pointers about what to do next. Because remember, a data audit is only one part of a larger set of things that you need to do to implement a data strategy and make sure that data can transform your organization. So without further ado, I'll just wanted to sort of start this sort of our workshop today with this interesting graph I've come across about how data can help businesses solve challenges. So in a question asking businesses and small enterprises, what challenges is your organization aiming to solve with its data-driven initiatives, which of course is a question that you could ask charities, any organization, be it a public sector or a charity or a commercial company. One of the most or some of the most interesting areas that data could help businesses with or organizations with were around predicting customer behavior, understanding how to engage with them, and identifying ways to prevent financial fraud risk or analyzing behavior and consumer sentiment. So to be able to make the most out of that, you need to understand what data you have that will help you achieve your business goals. And of course, what data you're missing and what data you need to be collecting if you're not already collecting. And the process of achieving that understanding is called a data audit. Now, the word audit might ring a bell about financial audit and scary things, but in this case, it's describing a very helpful, informal, and inflicted, quote unquote, process. So data auditing is a process of assessing if the information you currently hold is fit to help you achieve your data strategy aims. And by data strategy aims, remember, like last session we talked about that, it's also about what your business aims are. So you need to understand, in short, what data you hold, and if you own it, and we'll see why this is important. Understand what data you're missing, and of course what you need to be collecting, and think about the quality and compliance of your data. So the thing to remember is that as with everything about data, it's not just about data. You also need to consider in this people and how they use that information, how they store it, and their habits around it. Processes, so things like policy documents or frameworks or policies you have in place, as well as technology. So what sort of software, hardware, generally technology you're using around it, because sometimes it will create some challenges, sometimes it will create opportunities for you. A reminder of what I've been sort of telling you already. So if you've been in one of my previous sessions, you remember this picture. So data auditing is a very important step in a data strategy. It comes right after you defining your business aims and understanding what you're trying to achieve. So why is it important? First of all, a data audit will help you better understand the information and the data you hold and how to improve their quality, and as well as reducing errors. So this is a very important step in moving forward and improving both your data assets as well as the way you organize your information and how you manipulate it. It's your first step in maintaining GDPR compliance. So it's very important to be able to then move forward and understanding what it is that you need to improve. But also generally, you should see that as an exercise to improve your customer service and user service generally, and identify areas that require attention in your operations. So this is the step where I'm showing you the sort of breakdown of what you need to do to conduct a data audit. So I'm just going to go through it very quickly now by showing you the kind of umbrella terms, and then we're just going to go through each one of these steps and talk more about it. So first of all, you need to understand what data you hold and why you hold it. Then you need to understand how the data is collected and where it comes from. Then you need to think about how and where you store that data, how you use it, both as an organization as well as when liaising with external stakeholders. Who owns or who controls in GDPR terms that data, and what are the processes for keeping it, so storing it, retaining it, as we say in data terms, deleting it. Finally, are there any appropriate technology solutions and processes in place? Do you have everything you need to manage it correctly, or is there some area that needs improvement? So let's take that one by one and sort of go through it in more detail. So first step, what data do we hold? Why do we hold it? So it would be good at this step to sit down with either the worksheet that I prepared for you, I'm going to show you at the end of this session, or just a piece of paper and list all the data that you think you hold. And by data, we mean information, and I'll show you a list of where your information could come from. So what is that information that will help you measure your business aims, and also thinking about predicting future trends? At this stage, you need, once you have that list, which by the way, you might find yourself revising over and over again as you rethink or as you discover information that is stored in different places in your organization. You need to sit down and assess what quality it has and what coverage it has. So things to consider at this step would be considering what level of detail you have of that data for the analysis. Do you want user level? Are you happy with a specific region, or do you need to organize your data slightly differently to be able to come up with some answers to answer your business aims questions? How often do you update it? How you collect it, so your collection methodology, and also where do you store it? Is it in different people's computers? And we'll have a more detailed question about that in the next steps. Finally, very important, do you collect those and only those data that you need? So are you using everything you are collecting for a purpose? So does that data serve a need for you or a use? Do you have clear consent for that use? And on the occasion where you find out that you really do not have everything you need, do you need to create more data? So do you need to collect data? Do you need to get that data from open source administrative data, so data that the government, for example, holds, and so on and so forth? So some ideas there about this first step. Remember, these can also be data. So information that you store in an Excel spreadsheet, in a database, in Word documents, in paper files, although that will be quite an achievement to digitize it, to be able to manipulate it properly. But also, information can be stored in paper files. You could have it in bespoke software. It could appear in sales reports, feedback forms, social media, testimonial quotes, emails, budget spreadsheets, grant applications, case studies. So all this is information, and it can be used as data. The second step now. The second step is about how do you collect that data? Do you collect it? Is it online? Is it offline? So, for example, consider all these different ways of you interacting with your stakeholders, but via website, via telephone, in person, via mobile apps, via third parties, and just to name a few. There could be more of these applicable in your case that you might need to consider. What is the process of asking for consent, and what would be the related privacy policies that would apply in each case? So this is very important because it will then answer the question later on, how can you use it? Finally, if, for example, you have been collecting information for your users via a website form, and you have decided that you want to change a field or you want to change some of the questions in a survey, are you recording these changes over time? Both in terms of what fields you're recording as well as the scope of these fields. So this is again important to understand how this data has changed over time. So at the later stage, after the data audit, when you are asked to analyze that data, you will know exactly the assumptions and what needs to be understood at each data point. So here are some examples of data that you could be recording and how you are collecting it. So you could have, for example, software customer information collected by a CRM, as customer relations management software. You could have POS information about a purchase that you collect by your bank. You could have online shopping cart data that you collect via PayPal or by your website. You could have social media information about fans, followers, and what they say about their opinion about your service or your product that is collected by third parties, such as Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn. So all this is data that is worth considering whether it can help you answer a business aim or a business goal, and if you could get it. If you could use it for the purposes of a data analysis. The third step is going into the area of how you handle it, how you store that data, and what areas that you need to consider. So, very first question you need to ask yourselves is, do you store that data on a single PC? Do you store that on a shared hard drive in the cloud? If you store it in a cloud, where is that cloud server located? Are there any issues around privacy policies of these cloud services that you need to consider? So, for example, if it's personal data of EU citizens, do you need to consider whether you are okay to store them in US servers? Other things to consider is the storage on-site, off-site? What do I need to be careful in terms of business continuity of that data and sort of it becoming corrupted, for example. Other important question is, are the data stored in the same place? So do we all have, as a company, as an organization, a central place where all the data is stored, and therefore everybody can go and sort of look it up and create reports out of it? Or do different teams, or in fact different colleagues, keep their data separately on their PC? So are we talking about data silos, or are we talking about centralized warehouses? This is a very important question to find the answer to, because that will guide you further down the line about how you manipulate and how you bring it together and you organize it. Do you make some backups of the data? So is there any automated or manual process by which you create copies of that data in case of an error or a kind of destructive process happening and your data is gone? So is there a plan B in terms of deleting the data if you need to, or restoring them from a backup if necessary? Finally, we forget about this because we tend to live in the present. But if you are storing the data in a format, what are these formats, and do you need special software to open it? Would you be able to access the data in 10 years' time, or will you be able to access that data if, for example, that software was no longer available? Or would you need to migrate that data to a newer format? And this is an important question to think about at this stage, because it might change the way you store your data, but it will also help you remember that maybe a couple of years from now, you will need to spend some money migrating that data into your formats. So you need to know about that happening so that you can plan for it, both in terms of resources and in terms of downtime in your operations. So here are some examples of where data could be stored. So we have here a company, we have a sales team. The sales team might have customer information on their personal account or on social media. And there could be some customer information stored in an old email program and some stored in the new program we've just upgraded to. So at some point you need to bring them together. Or there could be customers who made purchases, but they were never entered in a system. So again, maybe they are stored in paper forms, or maybe they're stored in emails. So again, that knowing that information exists separately from the rest of your systems is important, because you can then address this and improve the way you are collecting and organizing it. 4th step out of 7. How do you use that data? And by you, I mean not just you as an individual or you as an organization, but also you as in you plus your stakeholders and plus your service users or your customers. So questions to think about for this step is, why am I collecting the data? What is the purpose of collecting it? So is it for marketing purposes? Is it to improve a service? Is it to develop a product? Is it to maintain some systems? But also the thing to also remember is that you are trying to improve your operations through data. So you need to identify which information drives the most profits or has more impact in the service you're delivering. So you need to prioritize collecting the data that's more important for your operations rather than collecting any data generally. Second element to think is, do you share this data with anybody? So who is looking, has access, who needs access? And for those users, have you signed, or do you need a data sharing agreement? This is a document that outlines who can look at the data and what for and for how long. So have you signed that agreement, or do you need to create one to make sure that any users of the data are governed by some rules? Another question is, if you need to transfer the data, how do you do that? So it could be as simple as between your colleagues in the same organization. So how do you collaborate on the same data, for example? Do you need to set something up so that you can all access the data, or is it okay to just email each other that the information, which is, by the way, not always the best and more effective way, and you have to consider about personal data and the types of data you're sharing. So how do you do it currently, and do you need to improve it? And if you're working with stakeholders outside the GDPR kind of remit, do you need to consider other areas there? Finally, and more importantly, do you need the data? So the data that you are looking at on each occasion, do you need it? Is it serving a purpose for you? If no, then do not collect it, do not store it. Not only is it effective, it will cost you in terms of resources, but it will also create complications, especially if it's personal data when it comes to GDPR. If it is the data that you need, clearly understand first of all yourself, but also clearly explain to your users why you need it to store it and what you will be using it for. And it's okay to say that I need that data because I need to explore its potential for telling me about trends in the future. But it's a very good question to ask yourselves when conducting a data audit. It's the time to stop and think whether you really need that data. So don't be data hoarders in some respect. Just use the data, keep the data that you need and you find useful for your purposes. Remember that a very important part of this step, as of all step, is the people and the processes and the technology. So do ask the people what data they are collecting, who they share it with, and how they transfer the data if they do, and why they need it. Because you'll find that you'll get slightly different answers depending on where who you ask in your organization. So different departments will have different areas and interests and different answers to these questions. Fifth step out of 7 is who controls the data in GDPR terms. So are you a controller or are you a processor of the data? In really brief terms, there was a very interesting 2-day seminar we conducted about that. So you can go back to the recording and have a look at what these terms mean. Very briefly, controllers is the organization that actually owns the data. It's the creator of that data. So if you have created that data, you are the controller. If you haven't created that data and you've taken it from another organization, you're probably a processor. So understanding the difference between the two and also understanding what you can do and what the different sharing protocols allow you to do with that data is very important for the next steps in your data strategy. And you're conducting the data audit, of course. So second question in this step is to ask yourselves, what safeguards do I have in place protecting the data that I have stored? So again, questions such as who has access to it, both within the organization and outside? Do you use passwords to help protect the data? How do you store these passwords? Do you encrypt your data if you need to, if it's personal? Are you doing enough to secure that information when you're collecting at the point of collecting it? But also, very importantly, as I said before, if you do have data that you do not own, do you have the appropriate agreements in place to keep it and use it? And remember, at the step of collecting data that you own, you would also have, you need to tell your users that you are collecting it and how you're going to use it, as we've said in the previous step. So you need to use and work with that data in the way that you've told your users that you will be doing. So transparency and honesty are very important. Sixth step, you need to think of the processes of how you currently keep and how you delete the data. So there are 2 kind of areas here that I'd like us to focus a bit more in detail. So the first is, again, links very nicely with GDPR compliance, of course, but it's why, what is your justification for the length of time that you're keeping that data? So you might want to consider things such as the value of that information for your operations, both now and in the future, the costs and risks of continuing to store that data. And also, don't underestimate the need of how you need to maintain that data and bring it up to date. So, is it easy to keep up to date? Is it easy to maintain and keep accurate, or is it very difficult to do so? So these would be the things that you would consider when thinking about how long you would retain that. Of course, consent and the permissions under which the users allow you to use that data. Second step is what happens if somebody asks you to delete their information from your records, and that's a possibility at all times. So do you have a process for identifying that information and deleting it? So as a kind of reminder here, the right to be forgotten applies to everybody, at least within the EU GDPR, where GDPR applies. So do you have a process in place to honor this? Can you find the records that need to be deleted easily? And can you provide that said data if, for example, a user asks for it? And finally, do you have somebody in charge of or responsible for responding to these requests, the data deletion requests from users? So all these very important. If you don't worry, it's fine. It's just now the data audit is the step to stop and think what you're doing and whether you are covering all these areas. And the final step is around ensuring that you have the correct technology solutions and processes to manage that information, that data. So again, going back to who would be responsible for managing that information, and both in terms of administering and maintenance of these data-related policies. So it could be that it's different people. So the maintenance of the data could be assigned to somebody who's more adept to data analysis and a data analyst, for example, or it could be the same person as the person who's looking after the administrative data-related policies. Some organizations, for example, have a data protection officer or information assurance manager or similar. So a person with that additional responsibility to look after these roles. Do you have the right software and hardware tools to collect, manage, analyze, document, give access to, and delete the data? So for all of these steps we've just described up to now, do you have the right software for you and the right hardware for you to enable you to do your job and work with the data? And another question to ask yourselves for this stage is, will you be able to implement any data quality processes? So if you identify areas for improvement, both in terms of the processes as well as the data quality, is there a clear path to implementing these changes? So again, that's also very important. Finally, don't forget the people. Have you equipped them with the skills to handle that data? So have they, for example, received information security training? Are they aware of how to handle personal data? Are they confident around knowing where the data is stored and how they could handle it, and the difference between, for example, personal and non-personal data? So all of this is important, because we need to remember that a data audit is not just about data, it's also about people and processes and technology. So you've done this, you've gone through all these very details, you've come across, you have some answers to some of these questions, you go back, you redo, you talk to people, you interact. What do you do next? So after your first data audit, I would encourage you to put this into a document, of course, or just fill in the worksheet I'm going to show you in the next couple of slides as a guideline, as a kind of guide document to help you get started. But the thing to remember is that this is work in progress. So it's not like you do this once and then you forget about it and put it in a drawer and not look at it ever again. It's a work in progress. It needs to be reviewed regularly. I would encourage you to review it at least quarterly. But you might find that if there are changes either in the information you collect or your setup, your hardware, your tools, you might need to do that more often. If needed, review and amend these policies and procedures, including your privacy notice, improving the safeguards for security, how you store the data, how you transfer it if necessary. You might need to find yourself that you might need to deal with some data subject access requests. That basically means people will come to you and say, what data do you hold about me? And then you need to respond around that. But having done this data audit, you now are in a much better position to know what information you hold about individuals, if any, and where it's stored and how you could retrieve it and delete it if necessary. And as I said, recommended to have somebody within the organization to be the data protection officer, if applicable. This individual, this group of individuals will have that responsibility of thinking about data in this way. Finally, this is not a scary audit. This is an opportunity to make data an integral part of your business operations. So it's a tool to help you understand what you have, what you need to get, and how to move forward with data and improve the digital transformation of your company. So all kind of very important steps at this stage.
So thank you ever so much for joining us today. I hope you really enjoyed the session that Kakia kindly delivered. We'll be just handing it over to the Q&A, where you'll have the opportunity to share your questions and have them answered live. I'm just going to share with you now a few more opportunities to learn from us. This is free data analytics support given to you live, and the recordings are over on YouTube. So in a week's time or a couple of weeks' time, we've got Bounce Back from COVID-19, how to apply for grant-funded data analytics support. And then we have later in September, evaluating in times of social distancing. We all know that these times are very difficult, but so how can you continue evaluating your services and measure the impact that they're having? Then later in October, we've got open source data, how and why open data is useful. And then in November, the visualization of data. Let's turn those numbers and words into visualization. And then looking right forward into January 2021, we've got social return on investment, measuring your value. You can register for all of these over on our website, blgdataresearch.org. Plus, we've got other webinars coming up too, just a few of them listed here, and these will be advertised on our website as well as over on social media. Finally, this is your opportunity to ask your questions live. We've got one question in already saying, how long should we store data for? An excellent question, thank you.
Oh, what a great question, and what a difficult one to answer. I'm afraid I don't have a 8 months answer, so I don't have an answer with a time in it. However, the kind of guidance of the rule of thumb to go with is you keep it for as long as you need it, and also for as long as you've agreed with your users that you will be storing it for. So, and by as long as you need it, I mean because it serves a purpose for you. So if it's data that you hold about your users and you need it for your operational purposes, you of course, you imagine that you'll be holding that for as long as that need for fulfilling an operational need exists. But at the same time, when you collect that data, if it's your data, assuming that it's your data, you would have said something to your users, the people that you hold that information of, and you will have agreed something, and you have told them something about it. Happy to answer follow-up, but the rule of thumb is you keep it for as long as you need to, and for no longer than that. After that, you need to delete this. So hopefully that addressed that question a little bit, but there's no clear 6 months, 12 months answer to that.
Great, thank you, Kakia. So we've got lots of feedback as well on one person has typed a question in, and it says, what is the message? Do we have to store all collected data, or only data that matters? An interesting question coming
Very
in.
good question. I think you need to store the data. You need to collect and store the data that matters. But it is very true that if you have just started thinking about these issues, you might not have a clear idea in your mind what matters. So it's a process by which you have to find out what matters, and also the message would be, yes, you collect and store only what matters, not everything.
Great, thank you, Kakia. Oh, we've got a nice data philosophical question here, really coming in from one of our regular attendees, Lawrence. Any data that you destroy destroys history, he says. How can you study slavery without slavery owner records from centuries ago? An interesting point there coming in from Lawrence as ever. Kakia, do you have any remarks to make on that?
Fantastic point. Absolutely. I would say that although so all these historical records are operational records, and the reason why we still have them today is because they fulfilled an operational need. Although you might historically say, what is that operational need? So no, you would not be able to study loads of things. You wouldn't be able to study trade, for example, in ancient Greece or in other places in ancient Egypt, if you didn't have these records of what was traded and for how much and from who to whom. So yeah, absolutely. So it is a very important point, and it's always a balance that needs to be stricken between the need to preserve for society and for history, and the need to maintain privacy and the right to be forgotten if needed. So very interesting question. There's no clear-cut answer, of course, but there is things that you can consider and that you can be guided for. Oh, well, thank you, Audrey. There has been a very important note from Audrey saying that historical records are justified with Article 89 from GDPR. So our law expert, GDPR expert, spoken. So thank you very much, Audrey. And it is covered by that. So you don't. It's not something that's not been thought about when talking about GDPR.
And if you'd like to learn more about GDPR, you can watch our GDPR masterclass. You can watch that again over on our YouTube channel. I can see a couple more questions coming in now, and we've got just a few more minutes before we have to close. So one person has asked, do we have details on the grant funding which we can share with you? Yes, they can be found on our website, blgdataresearch.org, which you can probably see on the screen. But you can also email us, find us over on LinkedIn and Twitter too. On the 31st, we'll be announcing it live, how you can apply. And also don't forget, our next webinar is exactly covering that. Everything you need to know about how to apply, plus a load of top tips on writing a winning application. Our next question is, what does GDPR stand for? So that's a wonderful question again, and that stands for the General Data Protection Regulation. Sorry, Audrey, you're going to be rolling your eyes now because we did that wonderful masterclass just a few weeks ago. So please listen again over on YouTube if you would like to find out more about GDPR specifically.
And just to say very briefly, Laura, I know that you're trying to close this, but this is a legislation, a law that so outlines how personal data can and cannot be used. So if you are in the UK, and also there is a European equivalent of that, the EU directive. So if you're not familiar with these data laws at all, it's worth, as Laura said, go and have a look at that recording, because Audrey has covered this in a 2-part masterclass.
And one of our last questions is, how should you destroy data? Is deleting sufficient?
Oh, very good question. I would say in most cases, just pressing delete is not enough. It will depend on how this is a whole new masterclass about how to properly delete the data. So depending on how sensitive the data is, you might find that you need to run it past certain specific software. Because as you might know, if you delete a file from your computer, putting it in the recycle bin or in the bin, it doesn't delete it forever. So there are copies of it stored in part of your hard drive that somebody with the right software could sort of find if they were to run it. So there are specific guidelines from security-wise that are asking you to run delete these 7 times. But there is some interesting guidance. If you are interested, do email me and I'll drop you a line with some interesting pointers there. So just to sort of conclude that really quickly.
Wonderful. Okay, so with that fantastic question, we're going to close today's webinar now and ask you all to follow us over on social media. Join in our next webinar, which is on the 9th of September, where you can find out more about the data analytics support we provide, how to apply, and much, much more. Thank you to Kakia, and thank you to you all for joining us, participating in the games, and the fantastic questions that have been coming in today. Thank you ever so much, everyone. We will see you all very soon.
Business and Local Government Data Research Centre, bringing data to life. Exploring data, enhancing knowledge, empowering society. Whether you are a business, charity or public sector organisation, we can help you use data to improve your work. Find out more about our free support online. Visit blgdataresearch.org or click the link in the description.